the White House has finally issued a long-awaited invitation to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The gesture comes 7 months after he took office.
Well, President Biden and Netanyahu disagree on several issues crucial to the future of the Jewish state, including an Iranian nuclear deal. Chris Mitchell brings us the details.
According to the Prime Minister's office, President Biden and Netanyahu shared a warm and long call. They discussed regional issues, including the threat from Iran, Israeli-Palestinian relations, and expanding peace in the region. Netanyahu also updated the president on the current status of the judicial reform legislation, a reason for the current rift in their relationship. The invitation did not mention whether the meeting would be at the White House or, as some have suggested, September's UN General Assembly. The invitation came on the eve of Israeli President Isaac Herzog's White House meeting. Herzog then addresses a joint session of Congress on Wednesday. The White House still voiced concerns about Netanyahu's government.
That doesn't mean that, and you shouldn't take away from the fact that they had a conversation today and that they'll meet again in the fall, that we have less concerns over these judicial reforms or less concerns over some of the extremist activities and behavior by some members of the Netanyahu cabinet. Those concerns are still valid.
It's how President Biden described Israel's current government under Netanyahu.
And this is one of the most extreme members of cabinets that I've seen. I go all the way back to Golda Meir.
Here in Israel, before the invitation, former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert called on the United States to reevaluate its relations with Israel. He also advised world leaders not to meet with Netanyahu.
It's not just Ehud Olmert, it's also Ehud Barak, it's also former candidates for Prime Minister like Tzipi Livni and interim Prime Minister Yair Lapid. All of them are lobbying the Biden administration and other world leaders to put immense pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu.
Alex Trayman of Jewish News Syndicate says this kind of lobbying is a first for Israel.
It's absolutely unprecedented, and it's also very, very harmful to the state of Israel, because don't expect world leaders and others to parse between Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders. And what this actually does is magnify opposition to Israel generally, not just to Netanyahu and his policies.
Despite the invitation and phone conversation, deep divisions remain between the White House and Netanyahu on a number of issues, including an Iranian nuclear deal, building settlements in Israel's biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria, plus the ongoing judicial reform issue. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, the extreme polarization of politics is not just happening in the U.S., it's also happening in Israel. It's happening in nations, democracies around the world. It seems to be a global phenomenon that parties just can't get together. They can't talk. They can't negotiate. They can't govern. When you have the President of the United States saying a prime minister's government is the most extreme he's ever seen, well, that makes it very hard to sit down and talk. And when you add to that, under the Obama administration, they tried to defeat him in an election. They actually funded the opposition. And now you have this going on. We've got to stop the polarization. That's the enemy. When you start thinking the other side is extreme and you can't even sit down, you can't even invite them to come and talk, well, that's the real problem.